episode 1 of Preferred Pest Control Podcast. I'm Jill, and I work for Preferred Pest Control and Wildlife Services. And today I have a colleague of mine, Shelley Cox from Remington Nature Center. She's their naturalist, joining us today to talk about bats. How are you, Shelley?
I'm doing great.
Thanks
for having me.
Yeah,
I'm always excited to talk about
We're
bats.
excited to have you here because honestly, I didn't know a ton about bats until I met Shelley, and she educated me a ton to help me get into this business, and I'm very appreciative of that. So thank you for educating me. You're a wonderful, wonderful person to have around for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words and faith in my abilities here.
Absolutely. So we chose bats because right now we can start to do the remediation and the exclusion of bats in people's homes. We cannot do that during certain times of the year, May, June, July. And the reasoning being because?
Bats have kind of an unusual life cycle. They mate in fall, or they may even mate during winter hibernation if something awakens them and they become active. Maybe it's a little bit warmer during our winter. So that's when mating takes place. The female holds on to her egg or eggs and also retains the reproductive fluids of the male. Then in April, she will allow herself to drop that egg and become impregnated, and will be pregnant for roughly 2 months. Then in June, she will give birth usually to one pup, but depending on the species and the conditions and things, she may have 2 or more. And then by August, those are usually ready to fledge and be on their own. So in that interim, in that time frame in April, May, June, while we're waiting for those babies to be ready to leave and not be so dependent on their mother, we cannot remove those from the structures where they are.
Right. And that being part of the reason because the babies aren't able to fly at that time.
Right.
So how we do the exclusion is we find the entry points of the bats, and they need the size of your thumb. That's all they need to get into structures. And so we put bat valves, bat cones up over those holes. So whenever they exit the building at night to go eat, which they do every single night unless it's below 45 degrees or if it's raining and the bugs won't be out, they'll go out to eat. The mothers, bats are actually mammals, like us, very closely related to us, and they do nurse their babies. So the babies will stay attached for a few days, correct?
Yes.
And then they get a little bit too heavy, so then the mothers have to leave the babies behind in the nursery, in the structure, and so the mothers will go out to eat. Babies will be left behind. So that's part of the reason we can't do the exclusion, because we don't want to leave the babies behind, because technically they're protected, correct, Shelley?
Yes. All bat species in the United States are protected, so we have to be mindful of that when we are removing them from structures or wherever they may be that we don't technically want them. So we do need to be a little bit patient about that and understand that life cycle, and that those babies cannot survive without mother's care. When she gives birth, it's kind of an interesting thing. She will deliver that pup hanging upside down.
Wow.
She forms her wings into almost like a basket, and she'll catch that baby. She moves them under her wing where the teats are located to nurse them. They attach themselves there, and then she's pretty much with them nonstop until they're a little bit older. And then, like you said, she'll start kind of pushing them away, letting them hang in the rafters. And these rookeries that they're called, these nurseries where these babies are, you might have a dozen females with babies, or you might have hundreds.
Correct.
Depending on the rookery, the size of the colony, and a lot of bats from other colonies will even come together in a rookery, and you'll have multiple females from multiple colonies creating this rookery for these young, and you just never know where that's going to be. I mean, it could be in your attic, it could be in a tree, a cave, you just really don't know. It just depends on that colony.
Right. I found it very interesting that it's either a maternal colony or it's a bachelor colony, so the males and females do not live together.
No, not until winter, and then they'll oftentimes, not always, but they'll oftentimes hibernate together.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just an interesting life cycle for them.
Right. And so that's what, if you do have a bat house or you'd like to put a bat house up, one thing they recommend is putting a screen at the bottom of the bat house because of, like you said, they drop the baby.
Right.
And I've gone to houses where I actually found 11 newborn bats that had fallen out of the hole into the gutters, and sadly they were passed away.
Sure.
But if they had a screen there, if we had screens, then the babies could crawl back into the structure.
Right.
So that's something to think about if you get a bat house.
Definitely helps. And I get a lot of questions about bat houses. Do they work? I think the verdict is up on that.
Right.
Some people have success with them. They can put a bat house up. They might attract a dozen or so into that house. But overall, I've not seen a huge amount of success with
Right.
the bat houses. It doesn't hurt to try. Maybe you can coax them into the bat house versus having them into your house or something.
Right.
But
And that's what I've seen. So I just had a customer yesterday. She had bats removed about 10 years ago from her house, and the gentleman placed a bat house on the side of her house because once we remove the bats from the home, they want to do anything and everything to get back into that home because that's their roost. They'll travel hundreds of miles to
Sure.
get back to the roost. So she did have a very full bat house. The only thing you have to do is make sure you clean up the droppings. So I hear 2 to 3 years sometimes it even takes for them to be established. So don't get discouraged if you don't get them the first couple of years. Hopefully, eventually you will get some bats in there.
right, because they're very tied to whatever their rookery is or whatever their home site is. So even migratory bats, if they're used to coming into your attic or they're used to being in a certain tree on your property, they're going to come back to that every single year. And bats can live an incredibly long time. Their lifespan is anywhere from 30 to 40 years, and in some cases maybe more.
Right.
So these are long-lived mammals, very tied to their rookery sites or their hibernation sites or their migratory sites when they return to an area. And so, like you said, it can be very difficult to change that in them and redirect them somewhere else.
Right, absolutely. But we don't want to discourage you from not trying a bat house.
Oh
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. You should always try.
Right. We want to preserve these for many reasons. What are some of the benefits we have with these bats?
In
Shelley?
Missouri, I think the biggest benefit is going to be their diet. They're all insect eaters here in Missouri, and we hear about the fruit bats and the nectar bats and all these other types of bats, which are great. But in Missouri, we do have insectivores. They are insect eaters. There are 2 suborders of bats.
Okay.
There are the Microchioptera and the Megachioptera. And there's 90% that are in the Microchioptera, which are going to be mostly the insectivore bats, but also the pollinating bats and maybe ones that are eating frogs or other things, because they
Right.
do have a varied diet depending on where they're from in the world. But for us, it's going to be those insect eaters. So you can imagine a small bat on a typical evening is going to be eating between 3,000 and 4,000 insects.
Wow.
Generally, they're going to be eating moths, beetles, things like that, but they will eat mosquitoes.
Right.
We tend to have this overblown notion that they're going to be eating millions of mosquitoes a night, and that's just really not
Right.
true. You have to look at it from the perspective of the bat.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out flying around, you're looking for food, a moth is going to pack a whole lot more nutritional value than a mosquito, and it's going to take as much energy to catch that moth as it does the mosquito.
Right.
So I equate it to a human going to an all-you-can-eat buffet. Are you going to eat the buffet or are you going to order a salad?
Right.
And so typically they're going to be eating the moths. And so many of those moths we know as caterpillars are damaging crops.
Absolutely.
They're feeding on things maybe we don't want them to. So they're removing a potential dangerous insect, or not really dangerous, but a potential pest
Right.
insect from the agricultural
Billions,
community.
billions of dollars.
Billions
they
of
save.
dollars.
They save billions of dollars in
Billions.
crop damage from the
Yes.
amount of insects that they eat.
Absolutely,
So
they do.
in the long run, it helps all of us. It helps the farmers.
You
It
bet.
helps the prices go down because if they're short on crops, prices go up. So it really helps everybody.
Right, exactly.
So they are amazing to have. They eat their full body weight every
Right,
night,
a
correct?
lactating female, meaning a nursing female, she's going to eat her body weight in insects every single night. So depending on the size of insects that she's going after, this could be as many as 6,000, 7,000 insects in a single
Wow,
night.
that's insane. And I get a lot of customers who call in who believe that they have bats in their home because they have droppings on their sidewalk and whatnot. Once they fly around, they eat, then they want to rest. They'll eat for about an hour, fill
Right.
up, and then they'll maybe perch on the side of your house, and they'll leave the droppings behind. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a bat in your home. So
Right, and that's very true. Bats typically want to find a resource to hibernate in or hang out in that's not going to put them in a lot of contact with humans.
Okay.
So while we do know big brown bats, I think, as you're probably finding
Yes.
out,
Mainly.
are the biggest culprit in a wildlife removal situation.
right.
Because they're the ones that will use those human structures. They will get into old buildings, homes, cellars, wherever they can go in order to find that safe place to be.
Right. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what troubles bats are facing right now.
I think the biggest problem that they're facing is habitat loss.
Okay.
There's a lot of degradation to habitats, and while most bats or many bats are very generalist in their habitat needs or their environmental needs, there are a lot of them out there that have very specific needs, whether that's a cave environment or a rainforest environment or something like that. And so when we as humans go in and we change that environment in any way, it's oftentimes very hard for these bats to adapt and to figure out, how to, go on surviving. Another problem is the overuse or incorrect use of pesticides.
Okay.
So we have to figure, in that Microchioptera suborder where 90% of the bats are at, the biggest majority of those are insect eaters. So worldwide, the biggest majority of bats are eating insects.
Okay.
So if we're out there just spraying pesticides very irresponsibly, we're destroying their food.
Right.
So that's another big thing that we're facing worldwide.
So you should call professionals like Preferred Pest Control, and we'll take care of your pests for you properly, the correct way.
That's right. And, and just think about, when you are in agriculture, and we know we don't want your crops destroyed by insects. I mean, because nobody wants to lose their livelihood. But at the same time, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to use those chemicals correctly so that we're not overkilling insects and then destroying a whole population of animals that depend on them. And it's not just bats. There's many, many, many animals out there that depend on insect populations. Truly, even we do. Other things that bats are facing, relatively new things that bats are facing, are white nose syndrome and windmills.
Windmills.
We have this great desire for alternative energy resources, but what we're doing by building all these windmills is we're creating a barrier for bats. They're flying through these migratory flight paths, and then they're either directly hitting the windmills, or because they're spinning so fast, you're talking about a machine that is spinning over 240 miles per hour.
Wow, it doesn't look that fast.
It does not look like it is spinning that fast. So it's creating this almost like a vortex of wind, and this wind difference, when these bats fly into that, it basically implodes their heart.
Wow.
It's more pressure than their blood vessels can handle, and basically they just explode.
Okay.
And so we're facing that. Then we have the issue with cave destruction. Human interference in caves, because many, like the gray bat, the Indiana bat, these are federally endangered bats, and they depend on that cave ecosystem. So we as humans, if we're stepping into that ecosystem and we're changing it in any way, those bats will leave.
Right.
And then there's fewer and fewer places for them to go that meet those needs.
Okay. Well, so not to get off subject with that, but you're talking about everything that's endangering them right now, but you're talking about insects. So actually insects, let's get on that subject. Saturday, you have something going on with Insectorama?
Yes. And we love that the bats kind of tie into that. Next Saturday, September 10th, and we're so happy Preferred Pest Control is going to be a part of this. You guys have from the very beginning, which was well over 12 or 13 years ago. And so what we do is invite the public into Remington Nature Center.
Okay.
We do charge just our normal admission rates, so you're not going to pay anything extra to attend the event.
Okay.
But you'll come in, you will meet you guys and learn about how to protect your homes, not only from insects, but wildlife now. And you'll get to meet the health department that will talk about things like bed bugs and how this can impact humans. We'll have a gentleman there that's bringing in multiple types of spiders, tarantulas, wolf spiders, jumping spiders. He'll be there to educate the public on those. Mm-hmm. Then we will have just various displays set up throughout the Nature Center to learn more about insects. So we'll also have aquatic pond dipping.
Okay.
So many of our
Are you gonna
insects.
have the gentleman this year with the
Oh yes,
eating
Paul will be back.
bugs?
Yes,
Okay.
Paul will be back.
Good.
But the aquatic dip netting at the lagoon around the Nature Center is always a favorite with the kids. They can put on their muck boots and come out and get a net and dip around in the pond and see what they can find.
Okay. And then you look under a microscope, right, to see what's in that water.
Right. We'll have microscopes set up. We'll have people on staff and on hand there to help them use those microscopes. And so you're going to get to see those microscopic organisms living in the water, as well as other slides that we'll have too. We'll have cockroach races.
Oh,
so there's going to be cockroach races. You can race for your favorite cockroach.
And it really is really fun. I've always taken my kids every year, and it's great to educate the kids so they're not scared of the bugs.
Right.
So when they do see spiders and do see and realize they're not harmful. They're wonderful for our environment, and we really need them. So this is
Right. Yeah, and Paul, our insect chef, he's probably the big hit of the day.
I'm
he
sure.
he brings in various insects pre-cooked, and if you're brave enough, you can try it.
It sounds really gross, but some of them don't taste that bad.
Hey, my favorite were the stink bugs. Who would have thought?
Yeah,
I know, right?
That's crazy. Well, so make sure you go out there Saturday and check out Insectorama. What time again was it from?
It's 10 to 2, September 10th on that Saturday.
Okay, yeah. Make sure bring your family out. It's super cheap to get in, and that's that you can get in and view everything in the museum as well.
Oh,
correct?
right,
Yep,
yeah,
so that's
exactly.
a lot. You got a lot for what you're paying. So, back on the subject of bats losing their environment, and that's part of the reason that they're moving into these houses, and why Preferred Wildlife is coming in there and doing the remediation. A lot of it that I'm finding so far, they are in older homes, but all these newer homes, the newer housing additions is where I'm really seeing them, because we are tearing down the trees and taking over the land, and they're going into the structures that are nearby. So I know a lot of people are like, oh, I love bats, and I love them having around and eating the bugs, but I don't want them in my house. So that's when you'll call us, and we'll come in and we'll do that remediation, and they'll be fine. They'll go find another house to live in, and so then the neighbors will call us as well. So, so if you want to give us a call before or prior, and we can get things sealed up as well before you get the bats into the home, so they can move on somewhere else more appropriate for them.
Right, absolutely. And really, the quicker you can get on that, the better, because we are getting close to winter. I know it's hard to think about that when it's 90 degrees outside, but we all know how fast winter just approaches and sneaks up on us. And so you want to make sure that you're giving them an adequate amount of time to find another structure or another place to set up home before those cold temperatures come in.
Right. And we try to do it through November, once it starts to get dip down in the 50s. And so we don't want to do it then. And a lot of customers don't quite understand. But once we educate them and let them know that the reasoning behind it, and by the time they know they have a bat in their house, they've had them for a long, long time. So
absolutely,
they can live with them just a little bit longer. So we make sure they get through the winter, so we can keep them around a little bit longer.
Yeah, and I think, I know you guys are getting a lot of calls now that you guys are providing this service to get bats remediated. But in the line of work that I'm in for the past 20 years, I get a lot of phone calls about bats in the winter. Right. Which is the time of year that you're thinking, okay, they're asleep, they're not awake, they're not active in any way, shape, or form. Right. But what we find is in the winter, when you have those extreme fluctuations of temperature, let's say we've been in the 30s for a relatively long frame of time, and then all of a sudden we drop to 5 degrees. Right. That's a huge drop in temperature. So what that sometimes does is activate those bats to move around, move in closer together for body heat. And that's when sometimes a wayward bat ends up down a chimney or ends up somehow, through a wall somewhere. And then that's when you're going to get that phone call in the middle of winter that says, okay, I've got this bat in my living room. What do I do? Right. And the same goes if we have a sudden warm up. The temperatures might warm up in the 60s in February, and then this is going to prompt the bats to want to go out and look for food and maybe get a drink and be active again. And again, they can get turned around and end up in your house. Right.
So you can give us a call if you're in St. Joseph. Also, animal control will come and remove the bat for you too as well. We don't want you to kill the bat. If anything else, just give us a call. We'll go get the bat. I work with Lakeside Nature Center in Kansas City, and they have a bat specialist there that we take the bats to, that they can overwinter and keep them until it's warm enough to release them. If you want to get rid of it, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Gloves, a towel, throw it over the top, and then let us know. We can come and get it. Don't throw it outside though. If it's too cold,
put it in a container.
Yep. If it's too cold, we don't want to let it go outside yet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely.
That's something else to do.
Well, the more that we disturb them, the harder it is for them to make it through the winter.
Absolutely.
You have to figure all summer, especially late summer, they're eating exorbitantly higher amounts of insects. They're packing on as much fat as they possibly can, and so they're going to use that fat store to get them through the winter. Right. And so if we're disturbing them, they're using energy resources they really don't have, and so the more we disturb them, then the less likely they are to survive the winter.
I think from what I read and from our training that we did, I think they said they can wake up to 7 times before that 7th time they've burnt so many calories that they're more than likely not going to make it through the winter. So we want to try to get them through the winter and not disturb them as much as we can. They're not going to bother you. You're not going to bother them, and we can live in harmony until we can get there and get them out of your house.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit too about hibernation versus migration with bats. There are roughly 1,000 species of bats worldwide. Wow. They are one of the largest groups of mammals. About 20 to 25% of all mammals are bats. Okay. And in the United States, we have roughly 46 or 47 species of bats. And then in Missouri, we have 14.
Okay.
And those bats range in size from the tiny little bumblebee bat
Little
with
bitty?
little bitty, literally the size of your thumb.
That's fun.
That is having a wingspan of about 6 to 6.5 inches versus the big flying foxes that have a 6-foot wingspan.
Okay.
Their diet is as varied as they are by size and location and habitat that they're living in. In Missouri, we have 14 species of bats, and we have 3 incidental bats that occasionally are found in Missouri.
Okay.
Of the 14, roughly 4, I believe, are migratory. That's going to be like the eastern red bat, the silver-haired bat, the hoary bat, and I cannot remember what the other one is, but there's one other one that is also migratory. So they're going to fly south just like birds do,
Okay.
and they're going to hang out in warmer climates. And then when spring returns, obviously triggers that desire to come back north. But then what often happens is we all know how Missouri weather is, right?
Right.
And so
and forth.
spring, you can have 60s for weeks on end, and then all of a sudden we're back down in the 30s or 40s. So a bat that is insect dependent
Right.
comes into Missouri too early, or we get one of those really severe cold snaps, it's wiping out those bug populations again. I
Right.
mean, they're going dormant. And then the bat has nothing to feed on. So oftentimes we find them actually dead just from starvation, just from not having access to that food.
Right.
So then when winter returns, we have many that are going to hibernate.
Okay.
Normally a bat's heart is beating between 200 and 300 beats per minute.
That's crazy.
And when they go into hibernation, that is dropping down, in order for successful hibernation, that is dropping down to 10 beats per minute.
Wow. Barely.
But by doing that, by conserving the energy from all those bugs that they've eaten, it is creating a situation where 98% of their energy output is being reserved.
Okay.
And so this allows them to survive those wake up periods during the winter, well, up to 7 or so, like you were saying. So we want to be mindful of that. We don't want to be disturbing those bat populations inside, because they're already going to be disturbed enough by weather
Right.
fluctuations and temperature fluctuations. So we just want to be mindful of that the more we bother them, the less likely they are to
Right.
survive that winter hibernation.
Okay. And the main bat that we find here, the one that I'm always finding in the homes, is the big brown bat.
Yes,
that we
absolutely.
have. And a lot of customers will have it flying around their house. That's when they know they actually have bats. And when I go to grab it and I show it to them, they're like, "That's not the bat I found.
Right.
That's not the one I saw. The one I saw was like this big."
Mm-hmm.
They look a lot bigger when their wings are fully expanded.
That's right. They look very mouse-like. In fact, their genus name of Myotis, I think it translates to mouse-like or mouse
Right.
or rodent. And so while they look very mouse-like, especially when those wings are pulled in, they're not related to rodents at all.
Okay.
They're insectivores, and they're actually more closely related to the moles and the shrews
Okay.
that we were talking about. But it seems like any little animal like a shrew or a mole, automatically it's related to a rodent.
Okay.
And it's not. They have very different teeth structure, very different dietary needs.
Right.
And you were talking about, this mole that you had for a while that had this insatiable appetite.
Yes.
Well, I mean, everything that we've studied about shrews and studied about bats, look how much they're eating.
Exactly.
So these have a very high metabolism. They're processing food very, very quickly. And so they're just insatiable.
Right.
And so this is one of the reasons why we need to be mindful of not bothering them in the winter.
Absolutely, yeah. So they're amazing to have. We've talked about why we need them around. We've talked about their hibernation. We talked about their diet. Is there any other interesting facts you have about bats?
Well, not so much an interesting fact, but I think it's a concern.
Okay.
A lot of people are concerned about diseases.
Right.
We hear
Correct.
this worldwide that bats are carrying diseases, and these diseases are jumping over into humans, and it's true. I mean, it happens. But overall, it's not a common thing. It's not a prevalent thing. I think in Missouri, the biggest issue is rabies.
Correct.
And so,
There's a fear. There's a
Right,
fear
there's
of bats
that
because
fear.
they all think they all have rabies. and
Right.
Not correct.
no, I mean, many times, even if you're seeing a bat out during the day, which is not typical, we know they're nocturnal, they're flying around at night. But if you see one out during the day, it doesn't necessarily mean it's sick.
Okay.
It could mean maybe a cat took a swipe at it and knocked it out of the sky. It's injured.
Right.
It could mean that maybe the temperature's dropped and it's cold and it's stunned from the cold.
Correct.
There's any number of reasons that bat could be down. But then again, you don't know.
Exactly.
So you want to be careful if you do find a bat that's down in your yard. Don't go grabbing it with your hands. Call animal control. Call somebody like you guys to come and say, hey, deal with this for me.
Right. And you don't have to necessarily get rid of them right away. So if you go out in the morning for your cup of coffee and you see one on the porch, just wait till that evening. More than likely, he's going to fly away that evening because he doesn't want to go out during the day because one of the predators are birds of bats.
Sure, right.
So,
well, and raccoons are a huge predator of them too, and so they're consistently feeding on bats. And think about bats hanging out in trees, and coons are climbing trees,
Correct.
and they find the bat, and so that's a big predator of bats as well. But the estimate of rabies within bat colonies is about 0.5%.
tiny.
So it's a very small portion of bats. And there's a couple of different types of rabies. Okay. There's one that tends to be more of a slow progressing rabies. It's more the aggressive rabies, the ones you think about when a dog is foaming at the mouth.
Okay.
But then there's one that's a very fast moving rabies, which is typically what the bat gets. Okay. So generally speaking, from the time the bat contracts the rabies from another animal or another bat within the colony, within 7 days they're dead.
They're dead pretty
and
quickly.
So they're going to die very quickly and have very limited time to spread that virus to somebody. But just be careful. Right. Don't pick up that bat with your bare hands. Use a towel or call somebody.
Exactly. And with the training also, they let us know that the only time we really need to take a bat in to get tested for rabies is if you know that you were bitten by the bat, or if you wake up in a bedroom and it's flying around and you're not sure if it did land on you.
Right, or you find it in your bed.
Exactly. Or a children's bed that they're sleeping in and they're not sure whether or not, or if somebody's incoherent. Those are the times that we need to actually take the bat in to be tested, because they do have to euthanize the bat to do the
exactly.
rabies
There's
testing.
no known test while the animal is alive. So that's another thing. If you do think you've been bitten and you're not sure, capture the bat. Don't let it go.
Right.
Hang on to that bat so it can be tested so you know for sure.
And they get that testing back within 1 to 2 days. And they say if you get the rabies vaccine within 10 days, you're good to go.
And make sure that you do it. Make sure that you take care of your health and get that shot if you need it.
Yep. So we don't want to hear about it. You knew you got bit
and didn't do it.
Exactly.
Right.
So, well, Shelley, I think we talked about a lot about bats today. Got a lot of education in for everybody. I hope everybody learned a lot about bats or a little bit more, and we can appreciate a bat a little bit more today. But make sure, again, so Insectorama Saturday.
Yes, Saturday, September 10th, 10 to 2. Regular admission applies, and you'll come in and learn a lot about insects.
Great. Yeah. So make sure you make it out, and we appreciate you guys joining us today. Episode 1 of Bats with Preferred Pest Controls podcast.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Have a good night. Thank you.